Okay. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting to order. So we will please start with a Pledge of Allegiance.
After the roll call?
Oh, no, let's do roll call first, sorry. I forgot we're doing roll call for committee.
Ms. Nyman?
Here.
Mrs. McWhorter?
Here.
Mr. Updegrove?
Here.
Mr. Hemingway?
Here.
Ms. Deeroff?
Present.
Ms. Hogan?
Here.
Mrs. Denon?
Here.
Mr. Brophy?
Here.
Mr. Foose?
Here.
Okay.
Okay, now we will have the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
To the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, God, indivisible.
All right, first up on the agenda is the approval of the December 10th Finance, Facilities, and Operations Committee minutes. So if I could please have a motion to approve those minutes. Mr. Fruce, second. Mr. Brophy, any questions or comments on the minutes from the December 10th meeting? Seeing none, can we just have all in favor of the minutes? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Minutes are passed. Next is public comment period number 1. Is anybody signed up for the first public comment period? No public comment. Okay. All right. Next on the agenda, I'm going to turn the agenda over to Mrs. Carol Pitts, and she will start the discussion. And the first up on the agenda is the Boyertown Softball Booster Club donation, and there is a decision required for this. So after we get the presentation, I'll be asking if anybody is opposed to moving forward with this.
So it's board policy that we have the board approve all of our donations, and Mr. Nick Palladino is here in case you have any questions on this item. He and I talked quite extensively. We do have the Softball Booster Club that would like to donate parkas to our softball team that would become part of their uniform. The reason that the Booster Club wants to make this donation is because it is not a mandated portion of the softball uniform. Therefore, the district would not purchase these parkas for the team, so it's an enhancement to the softball team and to their uniform. And the parkas would stay with the team, not with the individuals who would be wearing those parkas during the season. So I think that answers probably, hopefully I captured most of the stuff that Mr. Palladino and I talked about. Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
When they wear out, if they're part of the team, that means the district got to pay for new ones, correct?
No, Mr. Palladino and I talked about that, and he said when they wear out, they're either there'll be another donation or they will just go away.
But yet we're making it part of the uniform.
No, it'll just be an enhancement to the uniform, but it's not part of the
I thought
mandated.
you said it was part of the uniform.
It will become part of it, but it's not part of the mandated uniform. So
Okay.
it won't be something that we'll be having to carry on from the future. Does that
Thank
make
you.
sense?
Yes.
Okay, any other questions, comments, or concerns about this item? Okay. So is there anyone who is not in favor of moving forward with this? No one? Okay, good. So we will move on with that. So we have direction to put that on our agenda for our end of January meeting. Our next item is an update on the stadium, and there will be a decision required. So I'm going to again to turn this over to Mrs. Pitts, and then we have some gentlemen here who will be able to answer hopefully most of the questions that we have regarding this issue.
All right, with the stadium project, we had to request a variance due to the number of bathrooms that were in the original design. And Mr. Clough or Mr. Drescher or anybody, if I'm saying these things wrong, please don't hesitate to jump in and they will be giving us a presentation. So the number of bathrooms that were required a variance. The Berks County Construction Code Board of Appeals did deny us that variance, which means that we had to go back to the drawing board to make some design changes that would make the project conform with the codes so that we could move forward with the project. We do have a bid timeline that we want to maintain because at this time of year, contractors are starting to pick up their summer jobs. So we do want to move forward responsibly with this program, but this will require a scope change. So we want to talk about that. And then what we'll be looking for is for moving the scope change to the voting meeting on the 28th. I think Mr. Clough wants to release, if it's approved that night, wants to release the design documents so that the contractors will have them available to bid on. So hopefully I've captured everything there correctly. And Mr. Clough and Mr. Drescher, if you want to step up and give us your update, and we'll load your presentation.
All right. Thank you very much. Jay Clough with KCBA Architects. In the audience, we have the complete team, legal and design, for the stadium project, so we can answer any questions that you might have. We originally set out to do what we thought was a reasonable compromise on the code versus the number of fixtures. The code says, I was in here actually speaking to you about this quite a while ago, versus what the code says versus what we said is logical. So originally, before the stadium was condemned and was gone, there were 8 fixtures for the females and there were 8 fixtures for the men. If you calculate the code requirement for toilet fixtures, it is 66 fixtures total. And we said, well, gee, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And in any other county but Berks, I don't remember ever hearing the appeal being denied if you improve the situation significantly and have a reason to understand what you're doing. So there is the original floor plan that we were proposing. You'll see up there. And it basically had 18 female toilets, up from the 8 that were originally in the building. And it had 10 male fixtures, up from the original 8 that were in the building. And it had some storage, and it does have the concession on the end. We thought that was pretty good. We know the system is you have to draw the building to a point that you can go for a building permit and then be denied. When you're denied by the building permit, then you have to go through a process that takes a month or two to file for a variance. In this case, it's a county. There's a board that meets as needed, and they hear these things county-wide. So we were finally granted that variance hearing on November 18th. It was a crummy night like tonight. We went in front of the variance board. We made our case, and again, you've got a lot on your plate. We can get into any questions you want. It was fairly detailed. We had legal representation. We thought our case was presented well. For whatever reason, we got a letter after a very long time. We got actually an email on December the 10th that said, no, your variance is denied. You have to go with the code. Now, one of the things I want to point out in both of these, the before and the after, you are allowed by code to count fixtures in the high in an adjacent building, in this case your high school, that are within 500 feet. That was a blessing, because of those, we have 17 fixtures in the high school that qualify for that. I didn't bring that exhibit, but that's fine. So let's go to the next slide, please. Here is what the code will require us to do, and to answer any question up front, we had this checked by the local code official, and he said, yes, I agree with it. So we don't have to go back to the appeals board. We now have met their criteria. You see the storage is pretty much gone. The building is about 20 feet longer than it used to be, and it does fit on the site, fortunately. It now has 34 female toilets. It now has 15 male toilets, and we still kept the 17 in the high school. So when you get all done with everything, you end up with the 66 fixtures that you're supposed to have. So we set about as quickly as possible, and we're still waiting, to finish redesigning this, but we are doing that. I want to point out, I've talked to all the design team members. We will do this on our dime. You're a repeat client of ours. I think we did everything prudent. I think you'd be pretty upset with me if I walked in the room and started here, but at the end of the day, we will fix it and we will get it out to bid again as soon as possible, because again, this has to be built over the summer. There's a process that you know better than anybody, the public bidding process, so it puts us under a pretty tough guideline to get it out to bid. If we go to the next slide, budget, ouch, okay. This was the budget. We were in to see you, big long meeting. Title IX came up and kind of reversed the whole direction of the project back on May 21st. You will find this in your files. This exact slide was just clipped right from that presentation. The reason we bring it up, there are two things that happen. All those extra toilets and all that extra real estate being constructed raised the cost. So at the top number, you'll see the original field house cost was estimated to be $1,550,000, and that led to a total project cost down at the bottom of, I'll read it from here, 600 and something. Let me get it right. 607,033 and change. That's our baseline. We had Fidavia take a look at it, and again, this is an estimate. We will find out when we bid it what happened, but if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in May, we had the number you just saw. You can find it. Fidavia took a look at the number of fixtures, took some industry standards, this, that, and the other thing, and they're saying, hey, it probably added $350,000. That will be probably the worst case scenario. We do have some contingencies as well, but I think we want to set you up for, no surprises. And then what does that do to the total number? It pushes us over the $7 million. You see that at the bottom. There are no additional changes. The team is not charging anything to do it. And I don't think the code guy is going to charge anything for our building permit that would be any addition. There'll be enough soft cost to cover that. So those 4 slides kind of give you a real quick version of what went down. I can't answer the question. I know you're going to answer it. Why didn't we get the variance? I have no idea. I have never heard of it being rejected. In many of the counties that we work in, legal representation doesn't even go along because it's really a very perfunctory thing. But we meet the code. This will get the job done. Hopefully it does not increase the budget by $350,000. We won't know until we bid it. And ultimately, it's not like we bought a lot of expensive extra stuff. When you go back to your constituents in the supermarket, this is just a mandated code change that we don't have a choice with. So I think with that, I have everybody in the room that could answer any of your questions, and we'll be happy to take them.
We'll start with Mr. Updegrove.
Did you have to buy any more EDUs for that?
We were very fortunate and did not, so that was the good news.
How many did you didn't have any to buy, or you did buy?
We did not have to buy any additional EDUs. Part of the reason is the fixtures that we're using are so much more energy efficient. We ran it by the sewer authority before, and they're not giving us anything after as well. So we're in good. That is a very lucky thing. You are correct. That we thought about it, talked to them about it, and as of this point, we don't believe we're going to need any more. Equivalent dwelling units. It's the amount of sewage that you pay for the plant to process. The right to send your sewage to the sewage plant. And basically, I think what saves the day here, this is an intermittently used thing. It doesn't get used all winter long. So if you take the balance of the sewer coming from year in and year out, that's really what's getting us in okay shape. But that's what it is. Don't get it wrong. You pay a sewer bill every quarter. This is the right to send the sewage to the plant.
So good.
So, I have an observation. My son was a football player at Boyertown, so I've been in many area stadiums. I've never seen a bathroom that looks like that ever.
Nor have I. Even in the Link or the Citizens Bank Park.
I've never seen a bed. That's very unusual.
Very unusual.
Were there other variances that night that were similar to ours?
No, they meet as needed, and they all might meet once, twice, 3 times a year.
Was there any feedback given for the reason why? Besides they say this is code.
Well, I'll give you the feedback, and you're not going to want to hear it. They said we created the hardship because we created a stadium that was too big. And I'm saying I would not come in this community and tear down a stadium that you guys proudly built and used for 30 years and come up. It is slightly smaller now because of ADA. But honestly, I'm not ashamed to say we put back what was taken down. That was their letter that came back to us, basically said we created a self-imposed hardship. Fine. I don't agree. By the way, just for the record, we looked at other spots around the site. That's the other thing. Well, let's break the toilet rooms up and make smaller ones somewhere else. They don't fit anywhere. The whole stadium is kind of grandfathered into old setbacks now.
Okay. Would other Berks County stadiums would have had to go before the variance board?
Right. Apparently, the Wilson West Lawn, I am told, failed as well. And I think that might be the issue, but I don't know that. They had just beat up Wilson West Lawn ahead of us a few months. I heard it sidebar, right, guys? That was going into the room. I have a feeling that we were held hostage because of a fight with somebody else, but I can't put that in writing. It's just an intuitive feeling. I know Wilson West Lawn was even worse. They ignored the variance, built what they wanted anyway, I'm told, and now they're in big trouble. So there's something going on with Wilson West Lawn, but I can't answer that. But I have a feeling that was the issue. If you beat up on one school district, you almost have to beat up on all of them, and we were in that time frame, but totally speculation on my part.
And the process for appealing would be that you would go in front of the same board?
Well, we talked about the appeal process, and basically, what are the grounds? The law says, the fact that everybody got away with it, I'll give you my appeal. I drove to work today at 90 miles an hour, and I think that was okay with me. I want to appeal it. You gave me a ticket. The code says what you have to do. The only appeal would really be, I think, eventually, it's a national code. I have said year in and year out, there needs to be an intermediate level of toilet fixture requirements, something between Lincoln Financial Center and a high school stadium. It does not, the codes do not reflect that. So I don't think, honestly, we talked about it. It doesn't seem like what are the grounds? The code says what you have to do. The fact that nobody else does it, that's probably not going to win you a variance.
But Ms. Hogan, you need to know the attorney is here who was there. And he put in writing to us why we shouldn't bother.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lauren Chesney. I'm an attorney with Fox Rothschild. To answer your question, what we have is the number of fixtures that are required. It's based on the number of seats you have. Okay, so we are proposing over 3,000 seats in our stadium. When you're proposing that number of seats, it's a calculation. They say these are the number of fixtures that you need. It's a very cold process. In terms of we presented the testimony to the board. We got Jay admitted as an expert architect. We presented the other testimony in support of the application. This is what we'd like to do. We feel it's reasonable, and this is our proposal. In the standard of review, we did have the right to appeal it to the Court of Common Pleas, Berks County Court of Common Pleas. The standard of review is whether the Board of Appeals, the Uniform Construction Code Board of Appeals, committed an error of law or their findings were not supported by substantial evidence. Which, and in reviewing their decision, they reviewed all of the factors that the code requires that you submit. They didn't miss anything. They didn't leave anything out. Their decision covers everything that it was supposed to cover. There's in taking a look at that in the record, there really wasn't anything to hang our hat on. Do we comply with the code? No. And we knew it. We knew we didn't comply with the code. We were far off. It wasn't like we were missing one or two toilets or one or two urinals. Just on the women's side, 16 toilets we were less than what the code requires. And we knew that. We were asking for their cooperation, for their relief from that requirement. In the end, they said no.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to go on record to say that having been in many stadiums surrounding this area, I find it incredibly odd, and not in your fault, and of course, I just find it incredibly odd.
No, well, and that was part of our presentation, was some surrounding stadiums.
Right.
And what fixtures they have. Now, obviously, they may have been built before those code requirements were adopted.
8 stadiums.
And I think that was maybe the issue, is that some of those were built, were grandfathered or prior to code requirements.
How long has this been a code requirement?
I think for very many years. I think they've just been ignoring it in stadiums for years. That toilet code count has been in there for many code cycles. What you're seeing in the code community, energy is changing in the code. A little bit of fire safety because of different building materials, but basically toilet fixture counts are that's not a progressive piece of the code.
Right.
It's been there a long time.
All right.
And the other issue that you also will see is, in other counties, relief may have been granted, but here it was not.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Typically it is.
Right. I think that's what I find confusing.
Right.
I appreciate it.
As
Thank
do
you.
we.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's obviously incredibly frustrating. So just to clarify, the capacity of the new stadium is actually less than the previous structure.
Ever so slightly.
The number of seats, yes.
The number of seats accommodated, and the reason it went down, it has the same footprint, might have even a little slightly bigger footprint, but because of ADA. Clearances and spaces required, you lost a few.
Right.
I don't remember, 200 or 300? 320, there you go, my team's got it. So
And
you were 320 smaller than you were before, but that wasn't the exercise. The exercise, that's just what tumbled out of it. The exercise was, you had a grand stadium, we wanted to replace it with a grand stadium. So we put back what we were able to put back.
And what we had previously as far as bathrooms available was substantially less, and what we went to the board, what was designed initially here and proposed, was considerably more, but less than the code.
Considerably more, but less than the code. That is correct.
Right.
And far more than we had. And the other ace in the hole, everything we're proposing is ADA accessible, where your other ones really weren't.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things going on. And we added a family restroom. That's a code requirement, and that you didn't have. So we were really excited. We're improving, we're adding, we're this, we're that. They weren't buying.
And essentially, we're beholden to, the code says, as you described with the speeding example.
Yeah. Because I got caught, I want to ask that you don't give me a ticket. Is kind of, in Clough terms, that's what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
I think basically, I've never had it happen.
So,
I haven't heard of it. But
so it is incredibly frustrating, because I think everybody would agree that this is
excessive.
And very different than anything. If you go to visit any other stadium in the area, you're not going to find anything remotely close to this.
We gave them the seating count and the fixtures count for 8 stadiums in the league in which you play. Some were in Montgomery, most were in Montgomery. That's because that's where the majority of your games are. But so be it. Just to give them a feel, hey, we are going to be without all this change, we're going to be the premier in the league with the design proposed before we lost the variance.
So there were, in one of the documents that was provided, there were 3 different pathways we could go now, one of them being the appeal, which was suggested that would be...
It must be your document, right?
The appeal was suggested that probably wouldn't be successful and advised against. So can you just describe the other 2 options and just describe the options that we have before us at this point?
Well, after we received the decision from the Board of Appeals, And again, those were just my thoughts in going through the process. The first was to comply with the code, which is what they've done. They've redesigned their proposal to address those number of fixtures. My second thought was to see if there could be a dialogue with the code official to see if there could be some compromise worked out, if some things could be accepted that would be more than what our initial proposal was, but maybe less than what the code requirements, just to see if there was any flexibility that we may be able to pursue.
I can answer that.
Sure.
Code guy's really helpful. He loves you, but he is by the book. When we got into this situation, I started with him. I said, well, you know what? You're the guy. If you give me a building permit and don't deny the building permit, you're good. And actually, the code says that. The code says this is a national code, but somebody's appointed to interpret it. That's your code official. He said, I'm sorry, Jay. Take it to the board. If they give you relief, I'll give you a building permit. Whatever they tell you, I will enforce. Well, they said meet the code. So first thing we did, because I don't want to get before you guys again, we redesigned it, shot it off to him over Christmas. He was actually in, as was I, between Christmas and New Year's, and I had him take a look at it. And there is a letter that he gave me in writing that says, yes, Jay, I will give you a building permit based on this. He had two little technical things, fine, but the big thing in there says, I now agree with your fixture count. You meet the code. So that option went out the window. We tried that before, and I don't blame him, frankly. It's a high risk. If you get sued, he gets sued. So he enforces the code. He was gracious. He said, Jay, if you can sell it to these guys in the Berks County, I'll give you a building permit. We couldn't. So that option is not out there. So either you redesign it or you appeal it, and the grounds for appeal is pretty thin, as Lauren told you.
I had one other question, just for clarification. So there was temporarily, during construction, we were making use of porta potties and portable mobile bathrooms and things, and we got a separate waiver or variance at the time in order to allow that, correct?
That is correct. He did bend the code for a year, and the whole organization, Colebrookdale Township,
Yeah, but these
understanding
are
our
entirely
plight.
separate.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure that
No,
was
I want everybody to know, Colebrookdale Township is not the culprit here. All they're doing is enforcing. They've been very gracious about really bending the rules around us and letting us do some. Typically, you're supposed to wait and do it all at once, which means you would not have had a grandstand for this football season. They said, no, we get it. You're gonna, you get all these other approvals. We'll let you build a grandstand and use the temporaries again. That's why we're pushing to keep going. I don't think they're going to be on thin ice to give us another extension on that, I think. So that's what we got.
Okay, so we can't use porta potties at all?
No, as a matter of fact, they were thinking, I heard sidecars bars where they said, well, at least these guys didn't come in and try to use porta potties. That's a common one that people try. They're saying, hey, 3 times a year we have the championships, and for that we bring in extra stuff. No, the plumbing code says permanent fixtures that comply in all respects with ADA and yes, no porta potties.
Okay, I guess since we knew this was going to be a problem, well, maybe not a problem, maybe that's the wrong word. We knew we were in violation. Why didn't we go ahead and check this out before we did all these other things instead of waiting until we were ready to?
Okay, understand your frustration. Think of mine. I'm designing it free.
Well,
basically,
how much money did we borrow? And someone told me in the very beginning that this project's going to cost us $8 million, and we're almost there.
Okay, let's go back to your original question. We'll do one at a time. How did we get here? The only way you can go through the system is you have to draw it and apply for a building permit. So that is the problem. He did me a favor because I said, before I redraw this thing again, would you please this time look at it? And he graciously did, and he gave me a letter. But that is how the system works. You are being denied a building permit. To get a building permit, you have to design the whole shoot and match, draw it, submit it, and then get it rejected. That's why.
But if we knew how many bathrooms we needed.
I
And
knew
it
what
was
the
such a
code
big
said.
Difference.
I knew what the code said. I would have had to have drawn it earlier. Probably should have. I'll take that rap. I'm like everybody, I'm flabbergasted. I have no idea why we didn't pass.
And
I've
we
never
can't-
been refused
we
anywhere
can't-
else.
We can't apply for a variance based on hardship,
What's your hardship?
financial.
They will know.
Everybody's
That is,
running for-
I can guarantee you that there are several things in the queue that are non-starters. Financial hardship is not one.
Well, then you ought to think of a hardship because who made the decision that we're not going to appeal this? I didn't get the information till January 3rd. I didn't even know anything about it.
Well, we
And
only
the-
got
and
the
date-
rejection.
Drop end date is January 10th, which is passed.
We only got the rejection around Christmas.
Well, the letter that I seen was, the hearing was the 18th.
That's correct, but it
Well,
was,
they have to give you 30 days for the appeal, so you had to have it.
we got it, I wrote it.
The decision was dated December the 10th.
You're right.
It was dated December the 10th. And the one thing with respect.
Well, that's not Christmas, December 10th.
The one thing with respect to the decision of the board, the one comment that is included in their decision, as I said earlier, the number of fixtures that we need is based upon the number of seats that we have. And so they took a look at the number of seats and the information that we presented with respect to our attendance. And we included information about the highest attendance that we've had, and I think it was about 2,200 or something like that. And there's a comment right in their decision that says, we saw from your information the highest attendance that you had at any events over the last few years is 2,200, yet you're proposing to build a stadium at 3,600.
Right.
Why? And they said, we can't, as the Board of Appeals, we can't presume that you're going to be less than 3,600. We have to look at a full stadium. And because there could be an event that fills that stadium.
Correct.
And when we do that, you need to have that number of fixtures that's required by the code. So they kind of looked at the size and the code requirements and said, we have to presume that it's going to be full. Even though your attendance is not even close to that, we have to presume it's going to be full, and that's why they're saying we need this number of fixtures. So, like I said before, when you take a look at the decision and how they based their determination, in my view, I don't see that there's really grounds to appeal it. I mean, we know the code requirement. We know we didn't meet the code requirement, and they simply relied on the hard code and said, this is the number. We're not going to give you relief.
Well, you'd be going to the Commonwealth. What upsets me is that's the decision this board should have been offered to make. And I don't know as a chair, why wasn't that given to us?
I'll speak to it. First and foremost, we waited for a legal opinion on our options, and that letter was dated January 3rd, and I received it on January 7th. The appeal was due on the 9th. Secondly, I'll speak to the time frame. I don't know how long it takes, but I was very flabbergasted that a meeting was held on the 18th and we get a response on December 17th. So I was first informed on December 20th when we're leaving for break. So no one was around. So then we come back, re-engage with our attorneys to try to see our options. And the letter that you have attached there that was provided to the board was very clear that there was no leg to stand on. So you would spend money to appeal something that, by the way, is going to cost you probably to miss your timeline to get this done. That's going to cost us more money because you're going to spend money to pay attorneys to appeal it. Then you potentially miss your timeline before you get a court date. Prices are going up. So trying to keep this on timeline, and I was not about to think that we can turn this around in 2 days from the time that I was given an attorney's appeal, because this board has made it clear. We always want the attorney's input in this matter. That has been very consistent since I've been here as a superintendent. So we needed to get that decision also to bring to the board as part of the conversation if it was going to go to the board. And at that point, because of the holidays, there was no time. That's the answer to the question that you just asked. There really was no time. Now, I would say this, and I wasn't going to say it, but I am now. This whole thing is suspect, in my mind. Totally suspect. It makes no sense to me. And I'll add this to you. You really only have one side of your stadium that you can do anything with. When I came as a superintendent, it was very clear the conversation was to keep as close to the current footprint that we have. You need to know that you can do nothing with your visitor side. You touch the visitor side other than maintaining it, you will have to wipe out the entire visitor side because it won't meet code anymore. So the only thing you could do was take out probably 1,000 seats out of your home side. And at the time, you remember when we got here, we weren't sure whether we were coming back for graduation or not. So you would have wiped that out also. Now, we of course know now we're saving money right now in the current format of graduation, but had we taken out and downsized the stadium, then you would have wiped that out anyway, before we even can do an analysis between the Santander and the stadium. So the whole thing lined up into an ugly situation, and I am concerned because, again, what the presentation was that you were given was that every other time they've done this, they've not had a concern. And I'm just flabbergasted we go from 8 to 40 something, I believe, seats, and that's not enough. And someone decides it's time to follow the rules. And the reality is they have that right. What you do with a variance is, to his point, they have a right to decide whether they're going to give us the freedom to do it or not. And they decided not to for whatever reason. Something's changed, but past is that has not been the case. And at this point, trying to salvage this at the least possible amount, because your stadium issue also, what we're forgetting is we're in this boat because of failure to maintain it over years anyway. And if we keep doing this, this price is going to go up. So at this point, with only 2 days, trying to salvage this to keep it on track and to also control the cost, because cost market is rising very quickly right now. And that's my concern at this point. And everything else is just really weird to me and suspicious. And at this point, I'm the type of person, I play with the hand of the cards I'm dealt. I don't like it. I can squeal like a little baby, but I got to get over it and keep the ship moving at this point. I'm frustrated like you are. And I'm just, at this point, you know, when we got back and had information, waited for the attorney's decision, you got it fairly reasonably in time for that. Unfortunately, that clock over the holidays also ate up a lot of time when no one was around.
I'd still like to know why the board was not given a chance to
2 days is when
give their opinion. Who made the decision
days.
not to do this?
we didn't have
Let me
time.
put
2
it that way.
days.
Who made the decision?
Well, I guess you could say
That
me.
the date
2 days,
passed.
yeah. I mean, other than sending a letter to the board leadership with the letter from the attorney, there's no way that I was going to make a decision to appeal without talking to the board, because it's going to cost us money, which I couldn't. And I think we're going to get the board together in 2 days' time. So we focused on how do we get this thing back on track.
So board leadership and you made the decision. Is that what you're saying?
If you want to blame it on somebody, you
I'm
don't
not
blame it on me.
talking. I'm not trying to.
You're
blame
honing in
anybody.
on trying to figure out who made a decision. A decision was to move forward to try to salvage. I don't believe we could have made a decision in 2 days. And the history of this board has been you've never really gone against your attorney's advice. That has been pretty consistent since I've been here. So when I saw the very clear indication there is no precedent, it was the logical decision to make.
How many sewer?
And I was not going to recommend to go against their advice, because if I was wrong and you spend money, you'd be chomping on me for that. I sent the communication to board leadership. So other than that, if you want to, it rests with me.
How many sewer permits do we have to get?
You do not need to get any sewer permit. We will get a building permit.
No, for all the bathrooms.
You're covered under the number of fixtures that you already have purchased.
How many did we purchase?
You've had them for years. I don't know. We did not.
We're covered with just the 8 and 8?
No. The amount of sewage you generated is covered by what's called EDUs.
Right. So,
I have no idea how many EDUs. They go way back to when you expanded the building of the high school in the 70s sometime.
so we don't have to buy any extra EDUs
That is correct.
for that many laboratories?
That is correct. Because the EDU is looking at an overall consumption over the year. Those things are used so infrequently.
Right.
That's why. They're looking at the sewage flows, and that's why.
Thank you.
Okay, it's pretty easy. My questions. One is, we had an original variance for the first stadium, I assume, since we didn't meet code there.
No, that was not true. That thing was built 25 years ago. I have no idea how they got to what they got
So there
to.
was no code back then 25 years ago?
To be honest with you, I think that part of the code wasn't getting a lot of attention. You guys are a little bit far out on the edges, and things have changed a lot. Your district's more urban. I can't answer. I have no idea.
Okay.
I'd be very suspicious that no, because all the other stadiums I hang out and work with don't either.
Okay, so there's no variance on record then?
None that I
shows
know of.
anything else. That's, which is fine. It's a fair answer.
Yeah,
I'm okay with that.
None that I know of.
Okay, the second thing is, we went into this knowing we weren't according to code, correct?
That is
We did
correct.
do that.
Right.
So, in the project risk register and the project contingency funds, is that shown up as a portion for the project, for the initial project dollars?
There is a contingency.
Yeah.
We may or may not have to use it for this.
Okay, but I'm just saying, there's a.
No, I did
yeah.
not expect us to lose. I've never seen it.
But still, you should have an original project estimate. You should have had a risk.
That's what
item
yeah,
for
and
it.
there's a risk contingency in there, not specifically directed at this one issue, but in general,
See,
yes.
See, that's not what I'm used to. Usually your risk register follows each individual risk you have, and you assign a probability and a dollar figure to that. So I'm just asking, you don't have that, is what you're telling me.
We don't have it assigned on a dollar figure basis that I know of.
Okay, so that's not the way you're running this then.
That's not how Fidavia is running this. They're our cost estimator.
Okay.
But
So-
we put in contingencies knowing that things never come out the way you think.
I understand.
And
That's
we're
what
carrying
contingencies are for.
a fair number, but I do not want to tell this board that we can use the contingencies to get out of this trouble. We might be able to. We might be able to, but I don't know that. The bidding climate's horrible. The first time we bid this thing last year, we had to rebid it because we couldn't get contractors. I don't think things are much better this year, so we'll see if we can get contractors this year to do the second phase. There are a lot of really nice projects, high profit projects out there.
Okay.
So we have a contingency. It would cover this if we don't need it for anything else. But I think the biggest concern I have right now, and Dr. Bedden pointed it out, the bidding climate is contractor friendly and owner horrible. There's more work than there are contractors to do it. And a lot of contractors are not interested in public work because of the bonds and insurance and the paperwork. And if you're going to do bonds, insurance, and paperwork, then you want to have a high profit margin. It's just not there on this project.
Okay. So I guess my final question is what other risks are we out there yet that are they're unknown risks or known risks that you, I guess unknown risks you don't know. What known risks are still out there that we may end up being charged for later?
The known risk that
What's just known risks? I don't
the
even know
the known risk that I know of is the bidding climate. And I think there's 8% was put in for that, I believe. I'm doing this from memory. There is a number that was placed in there. Go back to that other slide. It's in there. There's contingencies in there. You'll see them. But that is a known risk. I guarantee you that's a known risk. Okay, you see, okay. Bid contingency, 8%. So we are carrying 8% on the chance that contractors aren't particularly hungry now. I
Okay.
guarantee you they are not particularly hungry now.
Okay.
That is a known risk.
So you have enough in that then that you don't have to, if the bids go up, you don't have to come back to us and ask us for any more money.
I think we might.
See, that's this late in the project, coming forward and asking for more money in this district is kind of not the thing to be doing. It's
Well, I
surprising
think
we
it's-
can't afford anymore.
I'll tell you what I think. It's way better than just bidding it blindly. I'm coming to you, cards on the table.
Agreed.
It was a good effort on the part of the team to save the district money. We don't want to build all those toilets, so we did it. We lost, It's going to cost something. It may not cost 350, but it is not what was on that sheet because it's almost double the toilets.
And
So that's what I got.
Don't get me wrong. I realize you're trying to do the best you can, but you also have to realize
You don't have the
10 of
money.
us are sitting here
You don't have the
wondering
money.
where are we going to get this money from.
I
And
do
so
understand.
We need to know much more of how you're doing and how you're saving us money and how we're not going to continue to just escalate through a ceiling that we can't afford.
Well, here's the deal. We're going to try to get out to bid with your permission in about 2 weeks and a day or so. Then we will know what the real thing is. I am telling you tonight, you should plan in your thinking to have to raise the budget by $350,000. If you don't, great. But I do not want you to walk out of here thinking we're covered with a contingency. I can't help it. That's the best we're going to do. And we're helping because we're saying, okay, we're not going to rub salt in the wound and charge for the redesign, but I can't control I'm hopeful it isn't that much, that it's not 350, but I guarantee it's not zero. So we're going to see what the economy of scale is. And all I need is a couple of contractors that think this is a great project, and maybe we're fine. Last year when I tried the first phase, I couldn't find them. It was tough. And we got it to work, but it wasn't easy.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we've gotten your opinion, Mr. Clough. What about Fidavia's opinion as to seeing this coming out and happening that we have to put more bathrooms in?
We're on the same page. It's kind of an anomaly. We've never seen one get rejected. It was kind of just down to the Berks County Board of Appeals, and they said no.
So I just have a couple of comments. To Mr. Brophy's point about contingency and risk, I think that since I've been on the board, all of the projects that we've done, we've always built in a healthy contingency because there are things that we know are going to be risks. We didn't build in any contingency for this because this was a zero in everyone's professional opinion. This was a zero risk. This was a no-brainer. Colbrookdale basically was like, yeah, you'll be fine. You know, Mr. Clough, all the architects, engineers, this never happened this has never been denied to a school district before. So in my opinion, there's something else going on here which none of the people in this room have any control over. The attorneys, Mr. Clough, Fidavia, our facilities engineer, our superintendent, our CFO, none of us have any control over what goes on in Berks County with their code enforcement people. And based on what the little bit that Mr. Clough said, and he doesn't have any proof, and will never have any proof, that there's something that maybe went on with Wilson School District. Maybe somebody in Wilson School District ticked off the board of the bill. These are three people in construction. They can do whatever they want because they have the law behind them. The problem is that we as a board have no control over what goes on up in Berks County with their politics. Somebody could have said to them, you know what? Wilson's not following the rules. We're going to teach a lesson to Boyertown. Boyertown. We're out. We don't like something in Boyertown. We'll never know. We'll never know. It's not fair. It smells of something that we cannot control, and I'm as disgusted by it, I think, as everybody on this board. The reason I thought it was fishy was the timing, because I asked the same question of Dr. Bedden before I chaired this meeting that you asked. Why are we just finding out about this on Friday? And then when I found out about the timing, that the code enforcement boards, they meet as needed. So they decide to have a meeting on November 18th. They make a decision on the 10th. They then take their time and they email our district on the 17th. And they know that we are, it's Christmas break and we only have 30 days. None of this seems to me to be how would be how if you sat on a code enforcement board and you've known that you've given variances to every single school district for the past 10 years and now you decide, oh, we're going to do it this way. It doesn't, so I don't understand. We never will understand, but it is, at this point, in my opinion, it is what it is. And I do defend the decision not to appeal because, as you have said, Mr. Chesney, that the law is the law. And you're and lawyers deal with the law, and the law isn't on our side. The only thing I will somewhat disagree with is, well, everybody's speeding and then I got caught. I don't really go with that analogy because everybody's been speeding and they're not, it's not like it's 55 and they're going 80. It's like it's 55 and they're going 58.
Understand.
And nobody's getting a ticket, and now we're going 58 and we're getting a ticket. So I don't understand why, but that's my personal opinion, and I don't feel that there's anybody in this room who is to blame for not doing their job and not keeping the financial interest of the district in mind.
I'd like to add one point that's very important, and Nick should get the credit. Your athletic director, because I'm saying to him, we got to get a decision. We got to get going. We're running into bid time. We're running into Christmas. Nick was emailing the board and saying, could we please have the decision? They would not have, they were going to mail it, which is what their right is. So we got it on the 17th only because Nick insisted. Nick insisted in an email, I need this. They finally said, kind of disparagingly, we'll get it to you in the mail, but here. So it's even worse. I wanted Nick to get the credit. Nick was, on my behalf, hounding that board, saying, could we please have the decision? Good news, bad news, or indifferent news, please give it to us so we can keep going. Christmas is coming, bidding season's coming, we got a lot to do. Nick forced them to email it, in so many words. He kind of shamed them into emailing, or I'm not sure when it would have come, frankly. That's how we got it on the 17th.
So we have Mrs. Deeroff, what? I'm sorry, what?
I've asked you a couple times that question for our attorney.
Oh, you have, I thought you said let the attorney answer. Okay, go ahead.
Now,
Yes.
how long does it take to get into court when these appeals? What's the court date turnaround time?
What's the turnaround to file an appeal?
When you file and then actually get a chance to go to court or get that process, how
It
long-
would be months and months.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted that on record.
Yeah,
That was the other issue.
It would be
And-
a month-long process. We would have to file the appeal. They would have the opportunity to respond. They would reproduce the record and all the exhibits. So no, it's not a quick process. No, absolutely not.
So, Mrs. Deeroff, did you have a hand up before, or can I let Mr. Brophy go?
Let Mr. Brophy go.
Oh. Okay, Mr. Brophy, then Mrs. Deeroff, then Mr. Foos, then Ms. Nyman again.
One thing, like I say, thank you for the work. I mean, it's not, this is, I don't want to beat you up on this one issue, and I understand with no precedent also as part of the legal, what's the right word here? The whole legalese. With no precedent, you've got nothing to go on. So not only would it take months to get in, it would take months to get done. So I'm okay with that. What I'm really trying to get to here is not just the one issue. I'm under the impression this stadium started out a lot less dollars than we're at now, and I understand your problem with code and regulations. I worked in the nuclear power industry. You can't get any more codes and regulations than I have. So yeah, okay. So I understand. So and this is where I get to the point where I continually ask, and this is something for future projects for all of us, that when you put a project and put the initial bids together, anything that could possibly be a risk or an opportunity has to go there. We have to know it's a risk. We don't, you may say it's a 10% probability. That's okay. But we need to know that this price could go from $3 million to $6 million if everything goes wrong, because we have to plan for that. So I'm not just getting at this one issue. I want to get at the whole process we just followed, which I don't think was done as good as it could have been. I mean, I don't want to hold you to the nuclear guideline of project management. We'll never get anything built. But I do like to see a little bit more rigor put into looking at the project, looking at the things that can affect you, looking at things that can cost us extra money, and at least putting it out there that we're aware of it in the beginning of the project, not when we get toward the end. So that's where I'm trying to go with this. I'm not trying to beat you up on any one issue. Just the whole thing here is much more money than I think we ever expected to spend. I'm new here, so I don't know all the processes that went through in the beginning, but I just see skyrocketing dollars and it sort of chokes me. Thank you.
I think when we originally filed for the appeal for the variance, that determined when they seen us, correct? When they called a meeting.
What it does is it starts the process, and they have the right then to assemble their board. Like I say, they don't have a standing meeting date.
Okay, when did you apply to have your hearing with them, and then how
I
long
will-
did that take?
I brought the paperwork. If you give me a minute, you want to ask some other questions, I'll dig it out.
Because
I have the,
something was said about it was funny the way it went. Well, they couldn't schedule a hearing before we applied for one. So that's why I was trying to find out. The other thing is how much in the,
Tom date says October 1st on that document.
Date of appeal, October 1st, 2019.
Oh, but that's not when we filed.
that's not when you filed, that was when the hearing was.
So it was even
Jeez. The other thing I want to know is how much money did we borrow total for the stadium project, or?
Let me look that up and get back to you. We did do the general obligation note in March, which was for this project, but I do believe there were I know there are some other funding streams identified in the process, because I was doing some research on this, because obviously I'm coming into this fairly, late in the game myself. I do know that we approved, in October of 2018, $300,000 out of the capital reserve fund that would be used toward the maintenance building that is part of this project. And I know I have a number in my mind for the general obligation note, but I don't want to give you the wrong information off the top of my head. So I'll get back to you on the borrowing.
Okay, and then my next question was, where are we gonna get the extra money for this? And I think at one point, Jay, you told us that you were gonna check about the equipment that we were gonna use into the, we're building all the concession stands, and they had some, and I don't know, you may have, and if you did, I apologize, I had missed a couple of meetings. I don't know if you ever got back to us on that, 'cause that's a lot of money. And the other building that we're building, how many EDUs did you have to get for that? Remember, we had no water coming there. I talked to you about that before. Water and sewer, and you
Again,
said,
Barry Isaac did run that past the sewer authority, and again, they said none because of the, it's one more, we're adding at the maintenance building, one fixture, well, two fixtures. We're adding the toilet and a sink. And they said our flow's coming out of that facility. Again, not a surprise. If you think, EDU is based on a house. So the
Right.
amount of sewage that we're generating is under enough that they don't feel that they need to charge us.
it's ironic, they charge by how many bathrooms you have.
I know, it's like
So
over the
anyway,
moon.
So we don't have to get any for that.
That is what I'm told,
And how are
yes.
and you figured out how we're getting it piped back there.
That's actually kind of easy. The pipe is running right in front of the building out in the
Okay.
street.
So that'll go off the building there at the bus station.
That will have a separate sewer line that will go from the maintenance building near the buses out into the street, yes.
Okay, but that's no extra cost.
It's no extra cost for the sewer units to be processed. There's a
For
cost to
the
install the
EDUs.
line that we have to do, but no
Right.
EDUs are required for that. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so we didn't buy any.
We got no EDUs for this project. We were using EDUs, and we did have that discussion with the sewer authority, because it was I think somebody here might have even brought it up, but we had that discussion, and they
Okay,
said
then
no.
what about the kitchen? Because that's gonna be a lot of money depending.
Right,
what's
we're
what.
going to stick to we were given $100,000 to outfit it, and what we can do is maybe take a couple pieces as alternates. We'll talk to the team about that. So it gives you board day decisions on what you can defer and what you have to put on day one. We are committed to meeting the budget we told you, and I believe everybody got together that a while ago, and I think, I'm doing this from memory, I think it was 100. And I told my food service guy, we got to hit that. Was it 100? Yeah, it was 100. And I told my food service guy, we got to hit that. He thinks we were. We'll see how it goes in this bidding climate. We can fix that. We'll put in a couple pieces as alternates, and you guys can pick it at bid day.
But we check what we have.
We checked what we have, and we're using what we're able to use, and that helped.
And we're still gonna have to spend the 100,000 is my
That is,
question.
yes, that is correct. That stuff's pricey.
Well, for somebody else to use, yeah, I guess it is. Thank you.
The date of submission on a transmittal that I brought with me was September 27th, 2019. Right, and that was after and I don't have that with me, when we were rejected by the township. I'll have to get that date, but we were rejected ahead of that.
Then they did see us pretty soon after we applied.
No, we didn't.
September 27th, you said you applied.
Right, but run that slide by.
It was October.
Within 2 months. The hearing was held within 2 months.
Yeah.
Of the application.
It was October something that was held.
No, the hearing was on until November.
No, wait. What's October? Oh,
Which slide are you looking
I am looking for the first slide.
Or
The
you can
very
actually
first
borrow-
slide. The very
the
first.
hearing was November
Yeah.
18th.
Okay, it was held on November 18th. We
Right.
applied on September 27th.
Right.
It was,
Right.
it was denied on December 10th. We did not receive it until Nick bugged them for an email. It was emailed to Nick on November 17th. We jumped on it right away just to see, I'm sorry, December 17th. We jumped on it over the Christmas break, working back and forth with the building official in order to come up with a solution. So when the year started, we would at least have something. My question was, what could we even comply if we wanted to? And luckily we can. So that's what we did over Christmas as a team.
So it was 6-7 weeks. It's not bad to wait.
Not bad. It's
No.
not bad. It's just it's how for a board that has no standing date. They poll these guys and they get a calendar. You ever try that? Get everybody.
Right.
I don't have a big axe to grind with these guys. It is what it is. I don't know why we didn't get it, but they're doing their job, and I tried to do mine for you. That's how it shook out.
Thank you.
I had a question.
We all know that the code officer up at Coverdale changed.
It did. A couple times actually during this process.
And we know that the one that's in there is a stickler for going by the code.
He's fair, but he does insist on the code.
So
Yes.
I think we should have seen this coming. I mean, I really do. He's been a stickler for sticking by the code.
He's not the one that rejected us.
No, it's a county.
He's not the fault here. It's the appeals board. He told me if the
But
appeals board grants
right,
it, I'll be
and I
fine.
understand that. But he's been a stickler for saying he goes by the code.
Right, but he did not go against us in testimony or say that we were doing anything wrong in testimony.
But he also didn't give us the permit without going through them. And they were the ones that said, yeah, we're going to. But
Right.
this guy up at Coverdale has been a stickler for sticking by the code. So I think we kind of should have seen this coming a little bit.
September 27th, October, November. It's 2.5 months before we got a response. December 17th, and we had to press to get it. Correct? And then you had to get yourself talked through once you got the official letter with the team, and then you met with me on the 20th. So that's almost 2 months and 3 weeks. So it's not just seeing us, it's getting a response. That is the time frame that's problematic that I was speaking to, how long it took. So I agree with get volunteers, I guess they are together, that was fairly reasonable. But the whole thing together is almost approaching 3 months. That is what surprises me.
I promise my last question. Is the maintenance building, that $800,000 maintenance building part of this? Yeah. Okay. I gotta ask this question. Like, how important is it to have that maintenance building $800,000? If we're looking at money and how much we're spending, how much we're overspending, do we really need that building? Is that something, it's not built yet, right? Or is it designed or?
Design.
It's designed, so we don't have to eat the design costs at this point. How much are the design costs for that out of the 800,000? Okay, but it's far less than 800,000.
It's almost ready to go to bid. It's not total, we're still doing the specifications, some of
Okay,
that stuff.
so it would be far less than 800,000. So I guess my question here is, if we're looking at, we got increases other places, should we be looking at that building as maybe that's something we don't do now? I mean, I understand people want it. I understand it's important to some people, but how important is it to this project? How important is it to the stadium that we stick with that and get it? I have to ask that question.
And I think that's, Mr. Brophy, I think that's a very legitimate question to ask, and I think all of us are starting to think about, this project and how it's going. But at this juncture, I think that's a discussion that we certainly are going to have. We're just not going to have that discussion now because we have to get through what is here, and we also have a budget presentation. So I think once we get all that information, I think that we as a board can certainly go back and look and say, hey, we have to put the brakes on some things or whatever. And yes, I think that is going to be a legitimate discussion that we're going to have. But right now, I think we need to just come to a consensus about what we're going to do with this latest issue.
It's going to cost us money if they continue on with the bid spec and put it out. If we're going to slow down that building, we should make that decision soon.
Yes,
Within the
I
next
agree.
2 weeks, because we have to,
Yeah.
it's either in the package or it's not in the package.
Yes.
And
So that's what
right.
has to be done.
And my
So, but let's,
commentary to his point,
go.
Ms. That he kind of gave you the timeline. I think that when you come on the 21st, 28th, I think the conversation, to your point, is a dialogue during that time and either do or die at that meeting is what I'm saying. Because I think it's a time to, does that make sense?
It's not gonna be a design change, we're there. The bid package is the bid package.
Right.
It's just you.
So they could, on that meeting date, also say continue or not with that piece of it is what I'm getting at.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
We would that from the documents. You would have it, you would own the drawings and the documents, and you could make a decision. It will only go up in the future, but you have that right.
And Madam Chair, the only reason I bring that up is it is a valid question. But the way the question is, I think that's a conversation piece that needs to be had that would prolong this, but we need to talk through it, and then you make an informed decision. It is a viable, and I did just tell the team that may be a question that could come up, but it gives you a chance, yeah. Right, but I want to make sure that, to your point, to bring them together, it's a valid question. Can't do it tonight because it's going to take longer, and the way his question is worded, it is somewhat of a philosophical and must have, need, what are the pros and cons, and we need to bring that information to you all as part of that conversation of what, because there are new people who won't know what was included and what was going to happen in there.
Right.
And you make an informed decision about it. And there's another piece that I can't, to Mrs. Deeroff's question, that I'm uncomfortable answering in public because I think it could influence our bidding process that I think I need to answer outside of a public forum on record for the financial interests of the district.
Okay, that's good. So I think what maybe we can do is for those people who were not on the board and not part of the whole process, perhaps in the Friday newsletter, maybe we could get kind of a history of how we got to this maintenance building and why we transferred the money over to why we had the money put aside, and we could kind of give a history so people can make an informed decision with all the facts. So I think that might be really helpful.
Yeah, that's why I asked how.
Yes. Okay, great. Mr. Foos.
Along those same lines, I had a similar question, so I appreciate that one was asked. I think putting it in the newsletter and having a discussion about that would be good, but also really including whatever options might be available to us. I know there's the Middle School West project and the high school project that monies were taken out for. Sorry, go ahead.
That's what I want to stay over. If there's information about that,
Okay.
can be included. But
so-
I think it can, I just don't want numbers and things given out in public that could influence people's belief about our capacities.
So there's, and I know when those bonds are issued, they need to be used a certain way, which is also a consideration. So similarly here in this project, if we were to remove an $800,000 item out of scope, that would obviously cover what we're changing here in this plan. We also need to think about what we would be doing with any of the remaining funds. I would think probably capital projects or something to that effect, but just laying out those options for the board I think would be helpful so that we can have that discussion coming up here. And then I also wanted to point out too, because it's been brought up a few times in a few different ways, we changed the name to this. I don't love the acronym, but we changed the name for a reason, because the scope of this encompasses a number of things. It's not simply a stadium. So when we talk about the cost of this project, it's not that's not reflective of the cost of the stadium. It's a piece of this overall project, and I think we need to continue to keep that in context, because the cost of the stadium is roughly half of this overall cost. If you add the softball changes and the maintenance building, they add up to the similar cost of the stadium. So it's roughly half. It's not the total number that we've been discussing. Although that's the overall scope of the ATAMMP project that's listed here. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Mr. Up.
I would have rejected your. Years ago, come back and.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions, comments, or concerns? Like I said, it's not the optimum. This was completely out of our control. I think everybody who gave advice to the board gave it in good faith that they were doing what was in the interest of the district. Again, there was a zero risk for this. There was no precedent whatsoever that this was going to be denied. So with that, I guess we need to go ahead and get a thumbs up or a thumbs down if we're going to go and move this forward, so we can continue the concession stand project. And again, the cost variance is $350,000, but if I understand estimate, it's just that, yeah, it's just an estimate at this point.
We're hoping the economy of scale will help.
Okay. All right, so is anybody against moving this forward? No. Okay, so the board we have our direction then. Okay, go to the next one.
Switch. All right, the next item on our agenda is also tied to the Adam project, and that is for a quote that we have for the bleacher and press box at the softball field, which is part of the Adam project. So we have received a quote from Stadium Solutions, who has been awarded through the Keystone Purchasing Network the bid for grandstands of this sort. So it has been vetted through the Keystone Purchasing Network already. Then they were awarded the bid for this type of work. And the Keystone, just so you have some background, the Keystone Purchasing, and by the way, this was new information for me, new to me, so I learned this as well. The Keystone Purchasing Network is operated through CSIU. So we have this quote for the bleachers and press box of $159,600, and the bad news is that they are only going to honor that quote through this Friday, January 17th. So what we're looking for tonight is, and this is not my preferred method of doing things, but with timing and how we know getting onto schedules, and at this time of year when schedules are getting full, this is a timing consideration, and I know Mr. Drescher has a lot of information about this if anybody has any questions. But right now we are looking for, similar to what we did with the phone system, getting a consensus tonight to move forward with contracting with Stadium Solutions. And another piece of background information that I'd like to provide is that they also provided the stadium project at the football field. So we've worked with them previously. We had a very good experience with them. So we're looking for a consensus to move forward with the process to be ratified at the meeting on the night of the 28th.
Okay, any questions, comments, concerns, Mr. Brophy?
This question. I don't know this because I'm not real sure. This has already been talked about before. I'm taking it from the stuff I've read. This isn't the first time we've seen this.
I don't know about this particular quote, but
But we knew we had to have
it is part of the project,
Okay, so-
yes.
And is it part of the Title IX requirements?
And Mr. Palladino is shaking his head yes.
So in other words, we have to have the press box, for one, and it's part of the Title IX requirements. And there's already been bid process out there, and this is the best bid we have for that.
This is the best one through the Keystone Purchasing.
Okay.
This was the system that was used for the major high school stadium
Mhm.
and repeated. They're very good,
Okay.
very responsive, and it is competitive.
Okay, and this has a track record then. This is 159. That's it. It's going to go in, and we're done with that.
As a matter of fact, there were some changes on the stadium, and they said, you know what, we'll leave it.
Okay.
There were blatantly things that could have come back to the board, and they said, you know what, we're not gonna bother. So they put in about $3,900 worth of extra stuff, so they're very honorable.
Yeah, this sounds like it's already been vetted to me. That's why
It's
I'm asking.
vetted. It
It's
is
just like
vetted.
this is the first time. So, yeah, I have no questions.
Do we have to do any house cleaning here, housekeeping? The thing says it was signed on the 2014, and then it was for mutual agreement. Anyhow, it extends 4 years up until the 2009.
Yes, good question. So I included all the documents with it. So they originally were awarded, and I don't remember the year, but 2014, and they have been awarded. They get an extension annually. So their
Correct, but
current contract ends February 28th of 2020.
Well, it says here 2019, not 2020,
Let me take a look.
with the possibility of an additional 2-year extension.
Which they did have.
I just don't want to.
No, that's an excellent question, and authentication to the server has not. So that's the original.
You'll say KPN extension executed 2019-01-19P. Pretty sure that's the one you're looking for.
Yeah, so. That would be the only one. No, that's it. That's the one. So-
Thank you.
This- if you look at the document that is the extension that was executed in 2019, it's a little confusing the way it's written, but it's that top paragraph, correct? It's the extension is saying that it's actually the parent company that is contracting with CSIU through February 28th, 2020.
Okay. So who's Central Susquehanna Intermediate?
They're in Milton, Pennsylvania, and they're allowed to do this kind of purchasing, cooperative purchasing across the Commonwealth. You have to be a member district, which we are.
Okay.
I just thought it might be worthwhile to just refresh everyone on what the Keystone Purchasing is.
What?
Keystone Purchasing Network is similar to CoStar's. It's a state-run through the CSIU. They ask contractors to bid on products or services. Everybody gets an opportunity to do that. Whoever comes in at the lowest price wins the contract for the following year. So anybody who wants to purchase or contract with services, they have this company or this product that's been vetted through that system. We do it for fuel oil, buses. They do it for just about everything that you could possibly think of. It's no different than CoStar. So it is in essence the same thing I would do by asking for 3 or 5 bids for a project or something like that to make sure that we're keeping our RFPs in order to justify the cost. It's just the CISU does this as an entity themselves. But you must, like Carol did mention, you must belong to them in order to take the opportunities, take advantage of the opportunities.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Typically, what I understand is when you go through this process, that's part of the vetting, that it's a part of the network that's already been pre-reviewed.
Mrs. Zero.
On the, can I talk about the press box? Okay, it says here there was a price adjustment, but it wasn't enough to worry about. So are they not gonna charge us more?
Correct.
Okay,
They're holding their price.
just wanna make sure, cause the way it says here, it doesn't say that. Tells me not to worry. When someone tells me that, I worry.
What's happening is the cost of the materials that they have to buy is going up, and that's what they're saying, hey, we can only hold so long. If you look at the quote date, it was last fall sometime.
Yeah, they've agreed to hold the price that they gave us last fall to this deadline on Friday. And that's due to scheduling, one, and two, cost. The sheer cost of materials have gone up since then. But because of the
So we're still,
relationship we had with them doing the stadium project, they're wanting to come back and work for us.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments or concerns? Okay, if not, is there anyone who is opposed to moving this forward? No? Okay, great. So we have direction to move this forward, and now we go to our last agenda item, which is our proposed preliminary budget. And we will need a decision at the end of this whether to move this forward to our voting meeting as well.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'm here to reclaim my thumb drive.
Oh, yeah.
Don't feel, so.
Here, let
I'm
me.
taking it on my paycheck.
We don't want that,
It's a
do we?
sweatshop.
We don't want that, do
Better watch it, there's an attorney in the room.
we? There you go.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not gonna get fired with that, Marie. Thank you.
Leave it there, I could sell that.
That was done by the code.
Okay. First of all, I want to apologize to the board for that last-minute change that I had to make to revenue yesterday afternoon. Something was not sitting right with me when I was actually thinking about the presentation. And I went back to the source document for the assessment figures for Berks County, and there was a clerical error in our office. We have corrected it, but I wanted to make sure that when I talk about it in public, that was corrected. And I apologize that information that you got over the weekend on that was incorrect. So we'll talk about that a little bit further on into the process, but I would most rather have found it in January than to have found it in June.
The second one.
The one
It would
in
be
the administrative area.
Yeah. This, in the second box.
328 KBs.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so the first slide we have here is our budget priorities, and for anybody who's read Stephen Covey, the seven habits of highly effective leaders, we always want to start with the end in mind. So that's what we're going to be looking at here just on this slide to kind of keep those things in mind. We have our newly revised vision statement, which is the very first thing that we have as our priority. We do want to be focusing on the future and making sure that we are doing our expenditures wisely, that we're not spending on things we shouldn't be, but that we are spending on the things that we should be to meet those students' needs and also our employees' needs. But we also want to balance that off with the revenues and the ones that we have control over. We want to make sure that we're using technology efficiently and, of course, supporting teaching and learning for both the teachers and the students. We absolutely want to have safe schools. And when we talk about the future, this budget really is a one-year budget, but it does affect future years. So that's something we have to keep in mind, the effect on the fund balance and the effect on our bond ratings. And then, of course, we always want to be as efficient as possible. So these are just the kind of things we want to keep on our minds as we're preparing the budget. So one thing I want to talk about is the budget timeline and what this budget does and what this budget does not do. So tonight I am presenting to you what I have on display at the receptionist desk as required by law, and it was also part of the public information, and it was updated yesterday as well for the PDE 2028, which is a format that we have to submit to the Department of Ed and the format that we are required to display for our public. So that will be what we're looking at tonight. And be talking about what's in there and what went in there. On January 28th, we have to, by law, adopt a preliminary budget. We actually have to adopt it by January 29th, but since our meeting is the 28th, that's the night when we will be having it for adoption. And then we will, in May, be working on a proposed final budget, which the board will be voting on at the May 12th meeting. And then we will have on the agenda for the June 16th meeting adopting a final budget. And from now, yay, and through June, we will be doing budget workshops at the Finance Committee. So this is the beginning of the process. We will continue to dig deeper into each of the areas from now until the final budget is approved. Now, one thing there's a couple things I want to explain about this timeline. This is set by Act 1. It is tied to the election cycle because some districts may actually want to go out and put a question on the ballot about whether they want to have their voters vote on a higher tax increase. So every school district has to adhere to this timeline, whether that is something they're going to want to do or not. So just so you understand, it is tied to the election cycle. It is a little bit earlier this year because this is a presidential election year. So last year you were voting on your preliminary budget in February, and it is moved forward because of the presidential election. So I just want you to understand why we are looking at this earlier than we did last year. So some of the things this budget does. It is our initial look at what we are going to do. It also communicates to our public what we are considering doing. It also gives us the opportunity to apply for referendum exceptions if we demonstrate a potential need for that. That gives us maximum flexibility. What I want to make sure that everybody does understand, this is by no means the final budget. We will have 5 more months of work until we get to that point. So what I show you tonight most definitely will change as we know more information. In addition to the budget workshops that we have here, Cabinet meets once a week on Thursday afternoons for fiscal sustainability. And the last few that we've been doing, as well as Cabinet meetings, have been a lot of discussion about the things that we can do to bring the deficit closer to being a balanced budget. If you have a question now, go ahead.
No, I just wanted.
I think, well, from my point of view, I think it might be while I'm talking about a topic to address it then. So.
What's the date for the exception date?
Oh, I have to look that one. The exception vote, I would want to put that on the 28th as well.
Okay.
And then I think the deadline to apply is February 13th, but don't hold me to that one because I'm not 100% sure. But yes, we'll have to have that as part of the whole resolution. Okay, just so that we can kind of get a sense of how our budgets look, I have the most recent fiscal year here, just so that we can see where our revenues are. Obviously, the largest portion of how we fund our school district is through real estate taxes. That's 58% in 18-19. We also have some additional taxes, another 9%. So our local revenues are by far our largest portion about how we fund our school district. And just also there in the lower left-hand corner, this was presented at our annual financial report, but just so you see that we did have a surplus in 18-19. Excess?
Is this the, oh, you mean this, I'm sorry, this is the end number. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. I've had to be retrained, so. Of $926,406.
This was the final, I'm sorry.
And then this is the results from 18-19 for our expenditures. Not too surprising. Instructional is our largest portion, as it should be, and that is our regular and special education, as well as our alt ed, our tech ed, for our technology vocational students, and pre-K counts is included in there as well now. That's a new program that we started through a grant last year. The support services obviously is also a large portion, and that is where our nursing, guidance, principals, business office, facilities, tech department, and transportation are. Mrs. Duroff, did you have a question?
You were talking about pre-K counts.
Yes.
Why are we spending more? That was supposed to be a program that would stand up for itself. Why are we spending more than what we're getting? Or how did that happen, or whatever?
I'm not sure why.
Well, on here we get $262,500, but to run the program it costs us $296,802.
What are you? I'm sorry. What? I'm not sure what you're.
Pre-K count.
Yeah. What are you looking at? I'm sorry. What document?
I don't know. They went away now.
And we also do, just so you know, because we are funded for, and I'm not sure if this has to do with that, since the state reimburses us for Social Security and retirement, we cannot count that toward the grant. Does that make sense? But I'm not sure what document.
When I find out.
Okay,
Oh, good.
Okay.
Thank you.
all right.
I was wondering why we couldn't hear.
Okay, so these are the assumptions that I made, and that first one is where I found the discrepancy on Monday afternoon. We start with the assessed value that we used for the tax bills on July 1st, and then as changes come through, those are entered into a spreadsheet to give us the most recent assessment, which is the source document that I relied on. But like I said, as I was looking at something, didn't seem reasonable to me. So that's when I went back to the source document and asked about that, and we did have to make the adjustment. So that is why we reduced assessments in Berks County, and that also meant that drove out less real estate taxes. For earned income tax, I am basing it on trends. This is an area that I'm a little hesitant. I think we could probably add a little bit more than I put in the budget. I get a little nervous about it. The amount that was our actual in 18-19 is actually higher than the amount that we have in the budget this year. So what I am looking at is actually looking at the trends of the actuals. So I did make a relatively large increase from what was budgeted, but it's not that large of an increase from the actual. And the 3-year average is 3.5%. I think I would feel comfortable with maybe the adjustment or the amount that I put in there, maybe changing that to 3% to be a little bit more conservative. The reason I'm kind of hesitant is because the trend I saw was over 4%, 1%, and then over 4%.
0.4% increase from the 2019 actual.
They can't pick you up if you don't target.
Yes, so because that number was what? Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, so Mrs. McWhorter, you have a question about the numbers. It says 4% and 0.4%.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's where I was talking about how that the actual was ended up being in 1890 larger than what we budgeted this year. So so it depends on whether you're looking at actual increase off a budget, and so this is why I'm a little bit hesitant. I'm a little bit torn about which way to go. I want to be realistic without being overly optimistic, if that makes sense. The economy seems to be going well. I feel pretty good about it, but I don't want to be overly optimistic. So that was one area. In the area of real estate transfer tax and delinquent taxes, these just depends on what is going on. We don't really see a regular trend, so what I used for this was the average of the prior year actuals, 3 prior year actuals. And we did use conservative estimates for the state, federal, and other revenue sources, and what I did for the federal is whatever we had budgeted for federal expenditures, I made the associated revenues equal that, because that's essentially what happens. When we expend federal dollars, then we basically earn it. So that's what I did for the federal. I did want to point out, if you may remember, we did have a correction on the transportation subsidy that we got in 18-19, that it was higher than we were anticipating. So I did, because the transportation shouldn't have a huge variance, I did mirror the 18-19 transportation revenue for the state. Two other large sources for the state are the federal Social Security reimbursement and the retirement reimbursement, and I did base that on the expenditures that are associated with that. I am trying to be, and I had a discussion with someone, pretty conservative on the basic ed subsidy. This is an election year, and there is some expectation that until we get the governor's budget, and we don't really have anything else to base it on, that there won't be any kind of large initiatives in that area. So I just did a very slight increase for basic ed subsidy. Sir. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Murphy, go ahead.
Thank you. So overall, you're expecting like a $1 million drop in the state revenue?
Oh, so, yeah,
The
no, when I
numbers
saw that, I had my own little heart attack, but the reason that looks that way is one of the items that we will know later on is what the tax relief will be. So right now, the way I budget it is as if we won't get any tax relief, so it's all in the local revenue. That's not going to happen. The amount last year was 1.7 million, so we know that we anticipate a similar amount. So that negative 1,078,000, I think is what it is, will be offset once we know what the tax relief from the state will be. And then the real estate on our side will go down as well.
Okay, so I can.
Yeah, don't have a heart attack.
Judging by that, I can look forward to another $1 million.
Yes,
coming into
yeah.
our revenue,
I would say 1.7.
So that offsets the expenditures?
For the tax relief?
Well, for anything, I'm looking at revenue. I'm strictly looking at revenue and expenditures.
Yeah.
So I'm looking right now at-
it'll be more of a one-for-one swap, if you will.
Okay,
So whatever the state gives us in tax relief, we will pass on to our taxpayers.
Okay, so it becomes a net gain of zero on that then?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not looking at $1 million more coming into the budget?
No,
Okay, that was
it's kind of a swap.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so just as a point of reference, the base Act 1 index is 2.6%, and our adjusted Act 1 index, every school district in the Commonwealth has a different one based on their aid ratio. Ours happens to be 3.2% this year. So for salaries, for classified and administrative staff, I kind of went in between there. For the professional staff, we did just approve our collective bargaining agreement. So I did apply that new salary schedule to the current staff that we have, gave them the step that they're allowed. We also put into the budget $300,000 for column movement because we do know that some of those teachers will be receiving column movement. And I also included the associated Social Security and PSERS that will be going along with that. And one of the things that there's been a lot of discussion about at many of the meetings is the salary inequities that have been identified by through the PSBA compensation study. The estimate that we have been given to address those salary inequities, and these are for our classified staff, it was $100,000. So I did include that in this budget as well as the associated Social Security and retirement. We do have an estimate that we've been using of 8% on health insurance. Trends have been showing in the last few years that this should come in a little bit less, but right now we're putting in what we hope will be the worst case, and that will be an opportunity area for us to reduce some of our expenditures. In somewhat good news, if you will, the PSERS increase this year was slightly less than had been forecast. So I did use the actual PSERS rate that was published in December. One of the things I did just to make sure that we weren't putting too much retirement in there is I looked at the trends of the past 3 years, because we do know that we do pay some people some wages when they are not eligible for PSERS. So I didn't want to take the pension on the entire salary schedule. It wasn't a large adjustment. It was about $21,000, but I thought that was an area where we could safely reduce that cost just a little bit for those people where we may have budgeted some kind of salary for them, but they won't be receiving that benefit. And Social Security and Medicare is a very common, that percent hasn't changed much. I think we had a couple years during the recession where they had lowered it a little bit, but that's pretty much been the rate that we've had for many, many years. And another thing that I did a similar thing. I looked at trends of how the actual came out as a percent of the budget. If I took if I took 77.65% of the total salaries, and that generated a number calculation, but then what the actuals were slightly less. And I took the highest year, which was about 98%, and that is because the software that we use doesn't take into account the fact that some people have pre-FICA deductions, so that does reduce, and that is their share of the health insurance. So I did, and again, I went conservative on that. I took about 2/3 of what I thought that would be. So I'm trying to be realistic without being overly optimistic. Hopefully that makes sense. This is a history, and it kind of goes with where I was talking about. This is just the first step of the process. So, and I know those, and I apologize to the people in the audience, there just wasn't a way to get this chart any bigger. The red lines are the preliminary budget, so that would be what would have been done around this time of year throughout the years. You'll see 2 years where we don't have a preliminary budget. And in those years, a resolution not to exceed the adjusted Act 1 index was adopted, and that meant that we did not have to do a preliminary budget in those years. We discussed this a little bit, I think at the December or November Finance Committee meeting, where I think it was maybe November, my recommendation was not to do that because it's actually a little bit more work for me up front, although I think this is good because we really get a starting point, but it also, by not adopting the opt-out, we have maximum flexibility should we find that we do have the need to seek referendum exceptions. So that's just sort of a history. And then the gray line is the final budget. And then the green line is the actual results. Obviously, we don't have actual results for 1920 yet. Okay, so this is probably what everybody really wants to know. How about raising the taxes. So that first number that you see there is what the real estate taxes would be generated at our current millage rate of 27.33. And that would leave us with a deficit of about $4.3 million. We do have the adjusted Act 1 index of 3.2, which allows us, without seeking referendum exceptions, to increase the millage to 28.2%. That does still leave us with a $2.6 million deficit. And then I had to kind of choose an estimated amount for exceptions. So last year, the exceptions that we were eligible for was $699,000. I chose an amount approximately close to that. It could be higher, it could be lower. So that would be a millage rate of 28.45%. Now, I know that that's concerning to everybody, and I understand that. I did want to talk a little bit, and I have a sheet here that I printed out, what that would do to a couple of points of assessed value. So if a property was assessed at $100,000 and the property owner was eligible for the tax relief, and I would base this on our current tax relief, which is $143. It has not changed significantly in many years. At the current millage rate, someone who would be eligible for the homestead exemption would be $2,589.66. At the adjusted Act 1 index, that tax bill would be $2,676.66, and that would represent an increase of $87 for that property. At this current preliminary proposed budget of the 28.45, that would mean a tax bill of $2,701.66, or an increase of $112. On a property of $150,000 with the same assumptions that they would be eligible for the homestead exemption, the tax bill would be $3,956 on the current tax rate. At the adjusted Act 1 index, it would go to $4,086.66, or an increase for the year of $130.50. And at the proposed preliminary budget amount of $28.45, it would generate a tax bill of $4,124.66, or a tax increase of $168. All right, so this is our budgeted revenues, and this is a comparison to the current year and to what I have in the proposed budget. And this is where I think, Mr. Brophy, you were asking about that. How could the revenue for state go down $1 million? And if you look at the asterisks there and the little note at the bottom, it does say that that does not have the tax relief. And what I mean by that, it is not in the state portion. And maybe I should have made that note a little bit clearer. So it would just be a moving from our local to our state. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that's how it works, so that's good information for me, thank you.
Yeah, and I should have made that note a little clearer, so I apologize. Okay, so this is our budgeted expenditures, also a comparison to the prior year. And you can see when we talk about object tells us what we are buying. You might hear us talk about functions in other places, and that's talking about the programs that we are supporting. But when we're talking about object, that is where we're talking about what we are buying. So that top line, you can see the increase for the salaries and benefits. That does include those increases from the assumptions that I made for both the salaries as well as the associated FICA and retirement and the medical benefits that go along with that. One area that we do have a large increase in from the prior year, and I don't know if that's just because we have a little bit more handle on who is where, is the CRES employees. That's part of what is in professional services, and you'll see a specific line for that, I think, on the next slide. One thing I do, this did jump out at me, and because I do know how much the CRES increases, and this is an area where I want to do further analysis when I'm looking at that particular object. Purchased services, that is where we charge our tuitions and our transportation. So you see we do have a pretty large increase on purchased services. And I have a breakout on tuition on the next page. So that does include our transportation contract we have with our contractor and the built-in increase that is part of that, as well as those tuitions to support our students who may be placed outside of the district. Equipment did go down, and that had to do with last year we did have the phone system that we put in this year budgeted there. Debt service has gone up slightly. We have some good news in that we did have some savings because we did refund 2 issues, so we do have some savings there, but we also have that general obligation note that we issued last spring, as well as we do leases are included in that line item. So we did do the lease for the cameras on the buses as well, so that is included. Transfers, you'll see that went down. I did take out the transfer that was budgeted this year to the capital reserve. I think that is one of those things that I liked how we did it this year, where we actually took a look at what was available at the end of the year, and that's when we made that decision, if any. But the biggest driver of bringing that down is that is the transfer that goes to the tech reserve fund, and that is for the leases that they pay through there. So a more expensive lease was dropping off this year, so we had some savings on lease costs in the tech reserve fund, and that's why that amount, bless you, has gone down. Okay. All right, so these are some of the factors that are driving our deficit. We do see that the salary increases there, don't forget, in addition to the contractual increases that we have for our employees. We also have that $100,000 that we did include for the compensation inequity study. The medical benefits increase is at 8%. That is an area where we are anticipating that we will receive a lower rate. No guarantee there, but as we get that finalized rate, we will be adjusting that number. The net PSERS increase, and I say net because we do get, as I had mentioned earlier, reimbursed by by PDE for half of our PSERS cost. So even though we had PSERS increase, we also have an associated increase in the funding. And similar with the Social Security benefits. Now, one thing, and I realized this after I did this slide, I do have the special ed increase in there, and I have asterisks there, and that says less salaries and benefits and our CRES employees. That also includes their tuition, which is included with the tuition down below. So I really should have reduced that by the tuition piece as well. So without the tuition piece being included in the other lines, that really should have been $834,000, just so I wanted to point that out. We did have an increase on our CRES employees. I think we do have a little bit more refined. Last year we did that a little bit later in the year. I think we've got some people in place. We know where our vacancies are. So I think that was a driver on why that increased. Charter schools is always a challenge for us. We have absolutely no control over which students decide to go to charter schools. We looked at historically and trends. We had a number in there initially, and we took another hard look, and we did reduce that charter school increase by $110,000 during the period where we have been refining the budget. And then the debt service increase as a result of our new general obligation note. So,
Oh, go ahead, Mrs. Joe.
So the increase is, that's besides what, there's another portion there, right? I don't know how to ask it. These are just what it increased this year.
This is from the previous year budget, yes.
Right, it's not a total of what it costs, it's an increase.
That's correct, yes.
So I guess my question would be, you said special ed is only $834?
Yes, because that
Okay.
$1,304,000 included their tuition as well, which is really included with the tuition below.
Right,
So
but we
I don't
don't-
want to double count that, so.
Okay, but we don't find out, if the increase has something to do with more children, or it's just the costs of everything that
So
went up?
I will say that special ed is very conservative with their tuitions. Are you talking about the charter schools?
No, just in general.
So they actually base their tuitions on their students that are currently placed, and they do put an inflator for the tuition cost per student in the next year.
Okay, then the crest that went up, that was just because of increases in salaries?
I think we had a few additional positions.
Okay, because that's a lot of money.
It is, and also, again, I wasn't part of this process, so
Yeah, that's okay.
yeah, I think in total, when you're looking at salaries and CRES employees together, but when we break out the CRES number, I think we've gotten a little bit more refined this year.
Okay.
Does that make
fine.
sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So some areas where we have some potential for reducing our expenditures is that the professionals do have a deadline to file their intent to retire, which unfortunately is tomorrow. So there is still an opportunity that we may receive some more retirements, since we pretty much at some point had to say we're we're stopping so we can get this presentation together, which is about last Wednesday. We have had, I think, another 1.6 people let us know that they want to retire that we have not incorporated into the savings of this budget yet. And hopefully, maybe Dr. Kim has some more that we don't know about yet. But no, okay. But who knows what tomorrow might bring. And again, we talked about it a couple of times, the final health insurance rates. We are certainly optimistic that those will go down, but there is no guarantee that that will happen. One of the initiatives that we have been investigating is how that we can bring some of those charter school students back into Boyertown, even if they were to choose the cyber charter that we contract with the Berks County Intermediate Unit, that still is at a significantly lower rate than the charter schools are. So I know that there is an initiative where we're going to reach out to charter school students that we've been talking about. I had talked a little bit about maybe getting a little less conservative on that earned income tax revenue estimate. I think if I were to add any additional, it would probably be about $100,000. I would want to keep an eye on the trends for this year as well. So that is something I haven't had the opportunity to dig into yet, but I don't want to be overly optimistic on that line. I feel we're in a pretty comfortable position right now, but possibly it is an area maybe we could increase a little bit more on the revenue side. We are continually reviewing staffing adjustments. As I talked about at the cabinet meetings that we have, at the fiscal sustainability meetings we are constantly taking a look at our enrollments and at our needs. And we are the people who really know the teaching staff have been fantastic about the brainstorming of the ideas that they've had to meet our students' needs while still being fiscally responsible. We do have the potential of some vacancy and turnover savings, which in the current year as well, I don't anticipate that they will be as large as they were in 18-19, but they could have a positive impact on where our fund balance ends for 19-20. And sort of along the lines with the staffing adjustments that I talked about is the potential of maybe modifying some of our programs if necessary to reduce expenditures further. So, and that is my final slide. Mr. Foos. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. That's fine.
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Foos, go ahead, please.
I have a question, and then I had two general comments. My question is, does what's included here incorporate any costs associated with redistricting?
Well, yes. So, and I'm not the expert on this yet. So one of the things is we did anticipate 3 additional bus runs. So we did incorporate that. And Mr. Drescher informs me that we can't just shut down a building and turn off all of the utilities. So we do have some minimal realistic utility costs associated with the building of Pine Forge. And I'm not sure if you have any other specific questions that I'm not addressing.
But I want to be clear, because Carol wasn't here, that building thing was included in the presentations because you have to mothball a building until you decide what you want to do with it. And we presented that about what is the board, because you don't want to have the building go into disarray while you're waiting to make a decision of what would happen with that building. So that was presented as part of the whole process. And as this budget also did what it said, we were not going to use this as a process to eliminate people out of Pine Forge staffing. So where is there may have been opportunity with TPs or something like that, all those people are being reassigned and deployed absent of a board decision to give us a different way. The challenge that we're facing, as you know, during the presentations is Dr. Kim ran data analysis, and we typically have had roughly 11 retirees each year. First, even with last year's low, was 6. As you can hear, we haven't gotten those yet at this point. So that could be the wild card that is thrown in this mix. So the wild card is where we are with retirees. We've held a line on what we presented in public, which is that we would not be using the Pine Forge process as a way to get excess people. That's a process we go through in this process and make decisions. And then, of course, as she pointed out, that we had a little bit more increase than we had in the past for special ed, but we've always articulated to the board that students move in, needs change, and that is sometimes a wild card that we don't, so that threw us for a little bit of loop. But we have a number of things that we start early. I mean, last year we had 11% projected increase in healthcare insurance, and we've typically done better than the market, being self-insured in the way we do ours, and we're hoping that trend continues. Do we have numbers of what we think that would be? Yes, but we'd rather start off where we are now and get those final numbers rather than give you a lowball estimate and have it going the other way, if that makes sense. So costs are associated with, we kept our promises with Pine Forge. It protected, that was another promise that we included the costs for determination, because the board has to ultimately decide what to do with that building. We can't decide to do that decision. So we're trying to make sure that we are doing our due diligence to maintain our property in the meantime, so those types of things still exist.
Okay, I just wanted clarification that those activities are included as a part of this budget. So
yes, we several of them. Some things that we wanted, that we want to include, we have not, because when I look at the number where it is, I put those things on hold because we can't keep growing. A lot of things we like to do, and we still are committed to them. It just may not be, if this doesn't get better like we'd hope, you can't do them now. You got to wait, because there's no unlimited well. So we still have a lot of those things that we talked about in this transition still in the back pocket. Programmatic changes that we can inform at the time as we go to the workshop, the new people on the board, but some of the programmatic changes are being looked at that were already discussed, that while academically we have the better model, but we also had models that we've used that don't cost as much, that we may have to make a tough decision. Because sometimes you can't drive they would say the Cadillac, and you got to drive the dependable Toyota.
And I had two observations. So clearly, I like that this chart was included. It's very helpful, showing the starting points and ending points over several years. And it certainly stands out that over the past couple of years, which I think is clearly a testament to the current administration and their team, that we've been decreasing the projected deficits, and we've been realizing smaller either deficits or actually having the additional monies due to vacancies. But it looks like we've been doing a much better job, which was a stated goal. So I appreciate seeing it here. It really stands out. But the one other thing I wanted to point out was earlier today I was looking at this, and this particular slide deck was in the administrative content. So I don't, if anybody was looking earlier today, they would not have seen this. So I just wanted to let people know this is in the public content now, so people can go and see this. I just wanted to make sure people were aware of that.
Just to speak to that, the dilemma, and one of our trustee attendees brought it out in trying to manage this, is the board's past practice of being able to see things first, and then I moved it prior to coming into the meeting so that the public could, if they were sitting here, have access to it. So that's kind of a way to compromise in that dynamic that went back and forth, to respect the board having its exposure to it first and then still making it available to the public.
I just have, Mrs. Giroff, go ahead.
I guess I would like to find out, or maybe it's on here someplace and I'm missing it. I'd like to know what it costs to run each school.
What I can do, Mrs. Giroff, we do have a lot of our budget allocate. The coding is so it can be tied directly to a budget or to a building, if that makes sense. We do have some areas because now we have to do ESSA. So ESSA was part of the first year this year in the PDE 2057. I don't know if that would be helpful. So some of those costs there were very specific guidelines about how we allocated the costs. But I do have the ESSA report that was part of the PDE 2057, if that helps. And then I can put together by building. There's going to be some things that aren't tied specifically to a building, but I can put together the way our codes are set up now. Does that help?
Yeah, because usually we get a wish list from every principal for their school.
So what we did is that we did give them a per pupil allocation.
Right.
It was the same per pupil allocation as was the previous year because they got their, let's call it their increase, if you will, because information services basically is bringing most of the software into their budget. And as part of the budget process, they do have, yes, a wish list. I think they've shared some construction, I don't want to call them construction, but maintenance things with Mr. Drescher. And they did also have requesting personnel, which we have not included in this budget currently. But they also there was some equipment that was requested, and I did put in $26,000 for equipment for the 2 middle schools for some cafeteria tables and some furniture. And most of the other, I don't think any of the other schools requested anything, but I did put that in there for that.
On the access budget in here, we have for 2021 $374,324. And I think that's low. Every year it's going lower, but our special ed expenses are going up, just like they did. You know, there's a big increase here again. If you go back, I went back to 1920. It was 400,000. 1819 it was 475. 1718 it was 475. It keeps going down. And administration, I think there's 20 in it for this year. This budget, last year it was 25.
Okay. We did have a discussion about access. It is an area we thought about. We do have to make sure that I don't know what the right way to say this is. And every district has a different philosophy. I did learn that at North Penn. So I know the philosophy in the past has been to try to slowly, the billings that we generate, to slowly draw those down and not to draw them down in a big amount where we basically eliminate our I call it the pot, for lack of a better word.
Right.
So that we don't draw it down and then all of a sudden we have to transfer those costs to the general fund. It is something we considered, and I think we can consider it some more.
I mean, I would think with more special ed students, for the increases we have in the budget, the access should be increased.
Well,
Carol, turn your mic off slightly.
okay.
But that's a mismatch because it's not how many special ed students, it's the type of billable services. So it's not a match for match just based on number. It has to be a student who qualifies for reimbursable services that makes the dollar value match. And one of the other things that with access is you typically try to be conservative, especially when the state flipped the model on us, which you remember the days because you brought it up when it was a large pot of money, and they went with a different provider, and that's when you see the first plummet of the reimbursement of that. But it's also dangerous if you depend on that number to really fund your budget. It is really one of the places you absolutely should be conservative on estimation and get more in than you anticipated, rather than you overinflate and then you don't get it in to the budget. But it is based on, and I don't know if Mary Beth has any other commentary about it, but it is a place that is really about billable services from the person, not the number of special ed students.
I realize that, but I know we used to bill out over 600,000 too.
And
they were, you can't tell me that all these kids all of a sudden don't need a lot of services.
And we shared with you with a report last year that showed why it went down and how it went down. For example, we had a period of time too where you did not have a physician of record. And with certain services, you can't get reimbursed from without a physician signing off on it. So we got that rectified. I think last year at some point, they got us back up. And we're also looking at the number of people who are qualified to actually submit bills for services. Now, does that mean that this conservative number may not be better? I would not dare tell you that. It could be closer to half $500,000. But we will never see the return that we had in the past, given this current model that the state has gone through. In fact, we talked about, we're scared that if we show too much of available money, that philosophically they may come in and do some things differently than what they've done in the past, like they did this time to us, to change the model. It is not a user-friendly model, in my mind. It doesn't help districts. It's one of those other kind of pull a carpet from underneath you type model with the state again. So I don't know if there's anything different. I think our concern is it was about 100,000, Ms. Deroff, less than last year. I don't have it in front of me on my screen.
It was 374 you have it for this year. Last year it was 400, the year before 475.
So about $100,000 is really.
Well, the difference is coming from the allowable expenses to be billed. We can't any longer bill for, and off at the top of my head, I'm not going to be able to repeat them all, psychological services for them sitting in IEP meetings or rewriting reports, which was a big chunk of the money that used to be billable. That has changed. They're also being submitted in, I believe, 15-minute increments, which I think is a change. But I just know that things that we could have gotten revenue for in the past, we are no longer able to bill for. One of the other biggest things that has occurred is students who have their most significant needs that are receiving services outside of our school. If the cooperating school that we are sending our students to, it will not break down those pieces, speech, OT, PT, nursing, etc., we can't then bill for those for reimbursement. So we have been losing monies for those kids who are, in the most significant of need of services.
And if I recall, we had that conversation. They denied our request to go back to the old model. Some of the outside people.
That is correct. There are some school districts that are going away from access completely and determining whether or not it's worth having the staff who are employed to continue to gather the reports, to put them together, submit them. They're just trying to balance whether or not it's worth continuing to do. So I do know some school districts are moving away from it.
On the pre-K, I found where I've found that information before.
Yes, so you were looking at, and this may...
From the revenue I was looking at.
So, yes, and then you were looking at the cost?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and one of the things I know, and I'll need to refine that number a little bit more.
And also the instructional program for that, too.
Right, so... which is the 1800s, right? So, no, I'm sorry. What?
Oh, the code.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I know what the code is.
I do. Sad, isn't it? It's sad, isn't it? So that's probably something I need to tighten up a little bit more. I believe I put that in as level funding this year, but I did let the software take the staff that's currently in there and generate the expenditures. So one of the things I just did the quarterly report this week is even though we may code the full FICA and retirement to pre-K counts, we can only get revenue on half of that. So I will go in, Mrs. Deroff, and I appreciate your comments, and make sure, and I'll work with Mr. Stout, that that we have that number and I can explain the difference. Okay, and if I need to make an adjustment, I will.
Okay, I just want to make sure because because I don't think the programs are even full. The students. I could be wrong, but they haven't been.
I think they are, actually.
Actually, a great question. I believe we are down to 2 seats left between all 3 classrooms, and there's potentially another pending. So there's a total of 60 slots that are available, and I think we're at, last I looked, was 58. So that's where we are. And I know last year with the transition between Becky and Carol, we, from the standpoint of running our budget within the Pelican system, which is in the state system, we did not exceed what the grant was offering. So depending on how those other funds get allocated between those reimbursements, in fact, we were below, and we really lost out on about $30,000 from the pre-K grant last year because of not having full classrooms and not getting full state reimbursement. So even with that loss to the grant, we were still able to stay on the positive side. Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Hogan, then Mr. Brophy.
Does this preliminary budget include additional school counselors?
No, it does not.
That is one of those areas that until we get this under control in retirements, it's been held off on the side right now.
Okay, I'm okay with this as a preliminary budget. I really am. I think a lot of nice work into it. Thank you. But as we go forward through the budgeting process, I'd really like to see the individual cost centers broken out along with the shared costs somehow, so I can understand which building is costing what. So I'd like it broke down into cost centers and shared costs. So that gives us more of a foundation to look at across the entire district. If I could have that could be part of it if you could. And I think you already have the code set for that, so you can probably do that. Okay, thanks.
So what I'd like to suggest is that there needs to be a collaborative with the board, because we get into a process where individual are getting and it's not used, she's going to be working on potentially 9 different projects. So there has to be a methodology. Now yours may not be very far off from what she asked, so
Right,
that's
pretty much the same.
and that's fine. But going forward, I would like that there's a thought process for these workshops so that we are collectively working on the same things and not 9 different requests. And there's obviously some things that, being new, that new board members need to have access to that normally we wouldn't have done because they never seen them before.
So I think,
Okay.
I think
I just want to
go
clarify
ahead.
something. What I'm asking for pretty much is to look at the numbers behind the big numbers. That's really what I'm asking you for. You have all the big numbers for everything all put together, which is great, but what I'm asking is the line items below that, which gives
Well,
me
I think you are,
understanding.
I hope you're talking about somewhat of a roll-up because
Yes.
I actually know that we have over 10,000
Yeah.
expenditure
Yeah.
account codes.
Yeah, I don't need to know how many pieces of paper each teacher is using. It's just I'm trying to get an overall of what each building's asking on I guess certain content or
So-
certain things.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, and again, I think what we need to do is we will have a budget workshop, and during those workshops we will look at different things. Like we'll look at a school board budget, we'll look at a professional services budget, we'll look at all we look at all those things, and through those workshops is how we prioritize what we're going to spend our money on. Just like Mrs. Hogan said, well, does that include counselors? So we'll have somewhat of a breakdown. I don't know if in the past that breakdown has included a per building expenditure, and I don't know if that is a lot of work. I mean, I don't know that. So maybe you could just ask. You could just answer that because I'm not sure about that.
We do, so what we have, just so you know, this is the kind of stuff I know. We have what's called an ASN, and that goes kind of with that, what program it supports. There's 2 digits at the front of that ASN, there's 2 digits at the end of that ASN. The 2 digits at the front tell us which building this supports. The 2 digits at the end tells us which administrator is responsible for that. So there's going to be codes that start with 01 for the high school, that end with 01 for the high school, that Dr. Foley is in charge of. There's also going to be codes with 01 at the front for the high school, with 26 at the end, which are things that Mr. Drescher is responsible for. So yes, I can do that. There would be some other things that we say district-wide on. That would be, I don't know that we want to get into the weeds of maybe allocating those, but there are certainly codes right now that can give us a pretty good idea, if that helps.
Yeah, pretty much it's like what I'm looking for is the building and departments. I mean, it's, you know, it's, like I said, I don't need the individual teacher, but this department gets, their request for money is this much in each individual school. So, or something along those lines. Not exactly that, but what you can supply based on what you already do. So that's what I'm looking for, just to break it down to see which cost center. I shouldn't say cost center, I'm sorry. Each building, what each building is costing us, so we can compare maybe costs among each school to see if there's things we should look out for that we're not charging enough or not paying enough for, or some things we're paying too much for.
So,
across the board.
I mean, well, first and foremost, I'm going to ask a couple questions for good governance, because you're getting dangerously close to getting into micromanagement. And I'm being honest, because are you going to decide some of what you're going to see? I think my first question is, has anyone looked at the other document that's already attached besides this presentation? Okay, but do you, exactly, but do you see the level that is more detailed than this presentation that you just saw? And if you look at it, that's a good starting point. It pulls out a lot of the information you're talking about. So I guess I'm trying to understand the end in mind. What are you trying to get to? Because we can't do 9 different versions of how people want to look at the budget. There has to be an end in mind and what you want to accomplish, else we will be serving you all and not serving the district. And that is not what the model is supposed to be. It is the collective of the whole board. But if it is something that has a purpose to it, to make an informed decision, that makes sense. So I think the question is, what do you want to accomplish? I'd also ask that we watch the video on governance for school finance that gives guidance on what the board's role is in overseeing finance. So if those haven't been done, I think they would help guide us. One, looking at this more detailed document that is what, how many pages? 24, not whatever slides that's broken out. And I, because that was what was made available a while ago.
That's the one that is required, and the advertisement that we put in the paper is required to be on display at the District Ed Center. It was only on display at the receptionist desk for a couple of more days than when this went out to the board on Friday, just to meet the deadline, the required deadlines.
What video are we supposed to watch?
Finance.
What's it called? What?
I think it's called.
Yeah, I think it's.
It's in your PSBA learning, in your portal, my portal.
In the PSBA learning portal, they talk about, it gives guidance to board directors when you're trying to plan a budget. And basically how not to be micromanaging, how you're supposed to look at the big picture, how the board's responsibility is to set the priorities and to say, this is what our priorities are, and then it's up to the administration to figure out how they're going to do that. Right? It's so right. So just to go back to Mr. Brophy's point and Dr. Bedden's point, I think we're having a discussion right now about the preliminary budget, and we're going to be asking questions, and then we're going to be having board workshops. if the information asked by any particular board member is going to be what the rest of the board considers into the weeds or maybe too much micromanagement, then the board comes together and says, okay, that's not information that we as individual board members need to have, and then that's a collective, that's kind of a collective decision that's made by the whole board when we get into the board workshops. So we will be, talking about that and seeing. But I do think when you watch that video, and I've learned this too in my years on the board, is how much information and how many line items you really need to look at to set the priorities and to look at decisions. So we will, going forward, we will have a discussion about that, because we do have to be really, really careful about getting into the weeds. We've had board members over the years who wanted the actual every single personnel and what they were paid, and then realized, okay, that's not what we want. I don't think that's what you're asking for, but again, we have to watch that we don't get too close to the micromanaging level of how our job is to kind of set the priorities and then let the administration decide how they're going to use that budget to do those priorities. So go ahead.
And I don't know if, and it may be one level down beyond this, and I don't know if you've had a chance to click on it, Mr. Brophy, but like you'll see instruction, you'll see admin services, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this yet, whether that is it or not. But I just want to make sure that whatever we do, it really is going to be useful. Because the balance also, the other side is, we could hit you with so much stuff that it also paralyzes us with, too much data and information, and then we're getting into comparison. I think the ESSA report is probably a good start, because it is driven by the idea that you're supposed to see, are you also being inequitable in how you're funding and spending money on schools? So I would argue that that is a good one, since it is required, we have to do it anyway, to share with the board, because it's going to get when you talk about buildings, it's already required, so that may be a good lens for them right off the bat. So my balance is trying to make sure we give you the information, but also without being excessive with the information.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not looking for how much teachers make. That's not my purview. That's an administration issue. You do the salary studies, and you do know what you have to pay to get the good people. So no, I'm not interested in that. But if you do the roll up through the buildings, so you see where our costs are across those, maintenance costs of the buildings, things like that are what I'm more interested in. I definitely don't want to. I have no need at all to do any, administrative or.
I understand, but I'm going to guarantee you, for example,
yeah,
you'll see, and I know this because having gone through this when I first came here, the comparison of buildings will be misleading to you. So, for example, Boyertown is all electric.
Right.
So it's going to throw that way out of whack compared to another Washington, because that's closer in size, and how the energy and stuff like that. So there are certain nuances that really you can't compare apples to apples, is my point.
Agreed, but it was something for us to understand that that's the reason there's differences in costs. And that we don't know to ask that question if we don't see the data that gives us that to ask. So what I really want to do is to understand more, so that we don't unnecessarily question expenses. So we actually see what they're coming from. Does that make more sense when I put it that way? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I just had a couple of quick questions. So one is when we talk about getting the exceptions, and it's only for PSERS and special ed, correct? It's still for PSERS and special ed.
I don't even think it's down for PSERS
So
anymore. I think it's
last
just
year,
special ed.
yeah, I was going to say last year there really was no PSERS exception. So the only thing we could even get exceptions for would be for special ed. So my question is, like, what is the threshold? How do you go ahead and like, what does your cost have to be a certain percentage? Like, how does that work? Yeah, if you don't know, that's fine. I can go to my.
Well, I'm going to go by my experience from North Penn. So this was the way my boss there explained it to me, is that you had to demonstrate. You couldn't go out and ask for exceptions if you didn't need them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, and we may not need them. We may be able to make the changes throughout the next months where we won't need them. But you can take any or all of the exception if you're eligible for it. I don't know if I'm answering the right question. But you do need to demonstrate that you have a potential need for it.
Okay. That's answers it. So the other question I had is just when you were going through those numbers about how much for $100,000 assessed home, how much the tax increase would be. So I simply do this every year when I look at it. So last year's millage was 27.33. Is that what we're going at? And it has the potential to go up to as high as 28.45.
I would say it will depend on what referendum exceptions we're actually eligible for.
Okay. So
it could be higher, it could be lower. That was just an estimate that I made for this exercise.
Right. So let's take out the exceptions. Let's just say that we go to the Act 1, adjusted Act 1 index at 3.2%, which our millage rate would go from 28.20 or from 27.33 to 28.20, right? So that would be 8. So what would that be? 87?
The
80.
The increase from $100,000, and I should have included that presentation in this, and I will add it to our next budget presentation.
Okay.
But it would add $87 for a $100,000 assessed house.
Right. So right now, so just and I just really want to stress this point when we're talking about dollars, because I think a lot of people truly don't understand what it means to their tax dollar on their assessed value of their house when we're raising taxes, when we're raising property taxes. So right now, what we could potentially be looking at is if we have to raise taxes to the adjusted Act 1 index, which is what we talked about last year about doing. Our average taxpayer who has a $100,000 assessed home is going to look at their tax bill increasing $87. So that is hopefully that will be the maximum amount. But I think that's what everybody can relate to. The millage rate and the 3.2% tax increase. I think it's really hard for the average person who watches these videos. They all they care about and all people want to know, not all they care about, but in terms of people who are worried about their tax bill, is what the potential tax increase is going to be. So yes, if you have a $200,000 assessed value home, your taxes could potentially go up to $180, and then it goes up from there. But I think that's really important for us to put in perspective about what we are asking of our taxpayers, and in return, what the school district and our students will be getting when we ask and the board decides to raise to that level. The other question I had is Mr. Brophy brought up the concern about our budget and the budget on the stadium and potentially looking at not doing the maintenance building, which we have been back and forth about for a long time. As a matter of fact, we actually put $300,000 aside before we started this whole thing because of the need by the administration for a maintenance building, and the cost of keeping our buildings inside, and we went through this whole entire thing. So, but I think that project is up to it's about 800,000 because the building is going to be bigger. So we transferred that 300,000 over, so it's a net of like 600,000. So my question is, if let's just say there was a discussion about whether we do that or not, that figure is in our capital projects budget. So we could not. Could we take that money out of capital projects, put it into the general fund, and then suddenly helps our
You
deficit?
cannot move money from capital projects into general fund.
Okay, so we cannot move the money from capital projects into general fund. But we do have a line item.
But I didn't have it budgeted either.
Well,
so-
that was my next. Yeah, we had talked about, and I don't know. I didn't.
250
see
is
that
in the
my-
budgetary reserve. That's a little different.
Yeah, so we had talked about, putting some money in there. So that was my other thing that I wanted to point out. And when we talk about it in the budget process, I didn't know if that was still because of how that money was. So, so that was okay. So those are the only other questions that I had. And does anybody else have any other questions or concerns? We will be having budget workshops. And we will be talking more about some of these things. Mrs. Diroff?
Couldn't we put the West money in there
Which West money?
that we'll have left over?
Yeah.
Are you talking about for the Adam project?
No, into general budget.
Into general
No,
fund? No,
we
I don't
can't
think we
move it
can.
from the construction funds back into
Oh.
the general fund.
I was just curious. So did we decide? Are we proceeding? Are we going to be providing the ESSA? This?
Yes,
Okay.
we had to do it anyway, and
Yeah.
it'll give you, it's not.
Yeah, I just wanted
work,
to
yeah.
make sure. Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I think it may answer some
So-
questions
Wait,
right
all right.
off the bat.
Okay. Mrs. Diroff?
So we can't move it back and forth, but there's a couple of buildings that need roofs, so we could use that money to do roofs. for
Right,
other
well, that
buildings.
was, well, that was gonna be my other point. So if you, it's all about your priorities and what the board decides we should do with that money. So, yeah, yes, instead of using more of our capital projects money, if we needed a roof or we saw that another building was going to need a lot of maintenance, we could say, well, we're going to prioritize that because we're worried that down the road we might not have money for that. At this point, as far as I know, from last year, Mr. Drescher had the whole entire capital projects plan out several years, and we kind of had a plan for how we were going to spend all that money and when we needed a new roof, and that was part of the direction that we had given in the past couple of years, so we didn't get hit with having to buy 12 vehicles and that sort of thing. So again, it's something that I think the whole board, we have to look at in the workshops, and then we have to decide as a board what our priorities are going to be. And just one last thing to as far as the Pine Forge issue, and Mr. Foos asked about how redistricting and closing Pine Forge, and it was going to save all this money, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions about that as well. We were talking about saving the salaries of 19 full FTEs. So my question would be, we were told in the beginning of that those 19 full-time employees, and just let's say go with the teachers, they would be absorbed by those teachers that were retiring. So if we could be. So if we don't, so if we don't have retirements, let's say we only have 10 retirements, then the other discussion is, do we have that savings of approximately, let's just say it's $100,000 per teacher, so do we have a savings of $1 million? Or then do we start taking that money and putting those teachers in classrooms to make class sizes smaller and or to have those counselors? So I think those are all the types of questions going through the budget workshops that we as a board are going to have to decide, and we're going to have to prioritize. I think we all have different opinions. I certainly have my opinion about FTEs and I was always under the impression that if Pine Forge closed, it wasn't going to be so we could have a huge personnel savings because we had to really watch for the size of classes. And it was with the understanding that there would be several of those teachers would be going with those students to those other schools. So we wouldn't have class sizes that were outside of our class size guidelines. And I was certainly hoping that this budget season we would be able to have a discussion about using those potential savings to have additional guidance counselors. So those are all discussions that we're going to have down the road. And for the new people on the board, I don't want anyone to think that, well, this is a preliminary budget, we just go through with it and then we're done. This is just it's just an exercise and a start, and it's almost a legal requirement that we have to do. So, anybody else I saw? Did you have your hand up?
Just on the topic of retirements, if this is way off base, please let me know. But we were anticipating a certain number based on previous years and basically a trend. However, we also did just agree to a new collective bargaining agreement, a new contract that essentially could impact that based on the timing. I mean, you're incentivized to stick around a little bit longer because your rate goes up. So the trend over a number of years, this year, I don't know if it'll be the same or not, but I just thought that was worth mentioning.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? It's getting really late. It's 9:45, so we really need to wrap this up. Okay. So is there anyone who is opposed to moving this preliminary budget forward at the January 28th meeting? No? Okay, great. So you have your direction to move forward. Okay, so next I believe is our any other board comments about anything? Mrs. Hogan.
I know it's late, so I'll make it brief. I just want to say that I have been in the PSBA online learning portal, and I've done quite a few trainings. They're very, very informative. They've been very helpful to me. So I just wanted to share that with my colleagues. It is a little difficult sometimes to find them, but if you...
Get familiar with the way you talk. I need your permission to help.
Sure. Yeah, it can be a little difficult to navigate, so if anybody needs any help, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Okay, and upcoming meeting dates are on our website pretty much any Tuesday. We're going to be here now that we're back from the holiday break. And do I have a motion to adjourn? Order? And Mrs. Deeroff. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.